Hello, BookTube. We're continuing our read-along today of Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. I'm doing this read-along with David Murphy, and we are going through the book chapter by chapter in the hopes to grapple with it. It once was an enormously popular text. I think it will probably be in print for all of our lifetimes. And it's Christopher Hitchens' entry in the fad of new atheism screeds against organized religion that was really popular on the bestseller charts about 10 years ago. And he's turns in the chapter that we're dealing with today, chapter 14, is called There Is No Eastern Solution. And in this chapter, he turns to the more quote-unquote spiritual, contemplative Eastern religions with his sledgehammer. In the course of the book, he has attacked Judaism. He's attacked the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as being barbaric and as not only leading to but actively calling for massacres and depredations of all kinds. And he anticipates in the mind of his reader that at this point in the book, a lot of those readers are going to think, well, I have turned my attention elsewhere. I derive my own personal inner satisfaction from the Eastern religions that don't engage in that kind of barbarism, and really you ought to as well. The kind of Buddhism is the main subject of this chapter, but I think that it can extend easily to New Age philosophies of any kind, to allegedly deityless religions. I've never understood that claim when it's made, particularly about Buddhism. I've never understood the claim that this is not even technically a religion because it doesn't have a god. But Hitchens doesn't get into that. Instead, he does what you would expect him to do. When he turns his attention to Eastern religions, he turns his attention immediately to their murders and depravities. he turns his attention immediately to several of the worst case scenarios. Instead of, it's the same pattern as in the earlier chapters of the book. He looks at those instead of any of the best case scenarios and says two things. One, that the worst case scenarios call for the abolishment of this thing, even though at one point in an earlier chapter he says he wouldn't want it abolished even if he had the power to do so, which kind of sets the whole book on its head. But also, two, that any of the best case scenarios aren't in fact the result of religion. So that is the double dealing that happens throughout this book, the dirty pool that David and I have both been commenting on. Hitchens at a few points in this book, and always in his enormously popular lectures, repeated the claim of scientists and science defenders, which is that the very worst hypothesis, the very worst argument for anything is an argument that cannot be falsified. If the argument can be stretched to fit anything, then it's obviously invalid. Then if it can't be questioned on its own terms because it can change its terms, then it's the least valid form of argument there is. Hitchens railed against religion by saying, well, for 2,000 years you said the world was organized such, life is organized such, and it's all organized by God, and he's the one who made it this way, and he made it this way, ex nihilo. He made it by magic. Then science comes along and starts to conclusively demonstrate that that isn't true. And the response to that on the part of some religious people, the majority of the religious world, has been to say that, well, God knew that. And that all the processes of evolution or sedimentation or tectonic drift that science is discovering are actually the means by which God makes the world, by which God creates these things. Which is, I understand the frustration of new atheists and people who argue against Christian apologetics, because what do you do with that's maddening? If you can stretch things like that, change the argumentative basis like that, then your position is not falsifiable and really can't be talked about seriously. Which makes it all the more ironic, all the more grimly funny that Hitchens himself is a master of that, a master of it. Saying, he will say it later in this book, but he also said it frequently in lectures. He would say, well, the only way that you can prove any of my contentions against organized religion wrong is if you can show me a civilization that was based on the purely secular and non-religious principles of, a Hume or a Locke or a Voltaire, and point to the atrocities committed by that society on a massive systemic level, knowing perfectly well that such a society does not exist. So the only way you can prove him wrong is to start the world over again, or create a commune. There are plenty of ways that you can prove him wrong, and one of the ways, not prove wrong, but argue against, and one of the arguments against all of the major chapters in this book, including There Is No Eastern Solution, is cherry picking. Hitchens gives you in the course of this chapter a handful of, like we saw in the last chapter, a handful of horrible people doing horrible things, and it's absolutely unavoidable in the course of those examples that those people would have done those horrible things regardless of religion, regardless of what religion they were, if they had any religion at all. He's dealing with con men, he's dealing with opportunists, he's dealing with murderous psychopaths. And he starts off the chapter in a way that touches on America in a slight way. He starts off the chapter with the Bhagwan, the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who was a con man in India for a long time, but who moved his commune, his religious followers, to Oregon, here in America, briefly. And by that point, the commune had been militarized by some of its, again, a perfect example of what I'm talking about, some of its absolute worst adherents. The Bhagwan was a con man, a mountebank, a liar, a hypocrite, an obvious fraud, but he wasn't violent, he wasn't dangerous. But his commune in America, in Oregon, was, and there were followers there who wanted to commit basically acts of extreme violence against their commune neighbors in small town Oregon. And this was a near thing. It was a very near thing. It was a near run thing. It's not. Hitchens doesn't go into great detail about it. He mentions that the little town outside of which the commune had settled itself very nearly became a Jonestown because some members of the commune spread food poisoning. They spread poison into the town's food supply, and might very well have committed mass murder. A mass murder that we would be remembering even now, along the lines of Jonestown or Waco or something like that. That was narrowly averted, and the Bhagwan was deported from America. No one wanted him. No country wanted him. He ended it, fetched up back up in India where he started. But that story had some very near twists and turns. The American law and order won out in the end in Oregon against the Bhagwan, but it need not have. Several times, local men got together in their pickup trucks, with 3 in the front seat and 15 in the bed, all of them with rifles, to go out to the compound and bag the Bhagwan. That happened several times and was only narrowly averted. So there is a whole bunch of stories that you could tell about what religion does and does not poison, involving that story in Oregon that Hitchens either didn't know or just chooses not to center on, because those, all of those people in those pickup trucks who were narrowly averted from just killing this guy, from killing this mountebank and all of his followers, all of those people were Christian. It's a fruitful little subject that he only uses as an opening to this chapter, and then he moves on to the Tamil Tigers and, of course, the Dalai Lama, who he ascribes to the Dalai Lama a winning personality. Very rightfully mentions that he also is a fraud and a mountebank, and that he also is a purely secular character. Loves high-end watches, loves high-end automobiles, fawns over Hollywood stars, is a being entirely of this world. And yet, when you look at the Dalai Lama and all the people who revere him as a god on earth, when you look into what he is supposed to be, what his own religion says he is, the contrast between that and what he actually is when you meet him or when you see him is just astonishing. It's just astonishing. It goes a long way to underscoring Hitchens' contention throughout this book that religions are man-made. The only major problem I have with that is that he seems to throw out the comfort that they give to people. And all of his fellow Four Horsemen, all of his fellow New Atheists did the same thing. They also at least began by throwing out the comfort. And that always struck me as rather heartless. Hitchens has some soaring oratory in this chapter. about the dangers of these things. In this chapter, he stresses the danger aspect just as much as he does in earlier chapters, knowing that it's going to strike a lot of his readers as discordant, because when we think of, Buddhist monks meditating in silence for years, we don't think of danger. Those things seem on the surface to be more more placid, more contemplative, and he has a couple of passages designed to unsettle that. One of which is he writes a bit of a manifesto from a Buddhist sect, and then says, effusions like this are, however wicked they may be, almost beyond criticism. They consist, like most professions of faith, in merely assuming what has to be proved. Thus, a bald assertion is then followed with the words, "for this reason," as if all the logical work had been done by making the assertion. Kind of ironic, considering how often he does that very same thing in this book. But he moves from attacking the fatuosity to stressing the danger. And the danger is one that he's brought up before in this book, which is that religions aren't content. He stresses it early on in an earlier chapter that you would think that if your religious doctrine said that you were the focal point of the attention of the ruler and maker of the universe, that would make you happy. But it doesn't, because you have to conjoin others to believe the same thing. And he hits that note again here. This grisly case also helps to undergird my general case for considering faith as a threat. It ought to be possible for me to pursue my studies and researches in one house, and for the Buddhist to spin his wheel in another. But contempt for the intellect has a strange way of not being passive. One or two things may happen. Those who are innocently credulous may become easy prey for those who are less scrupulous and who seek to lead and inspire them, or those whose credulity has led their own society into stagnation may seek a solution, not in true self-examination, but in blaming others for their backwardness. Both of these things happen in the most consecratedly spiritual society of them all. And I like, this is once again a glimpse of the Hitchens that I wish had been present all throughout this book, because that is powerfully written and absolutely true. And it's not, once again, I should stress what David and I have been stressing all along, which is that this phenomenon is not religious. You can see it in religion, but you can see it everywhere else as well. There are plenty of people, for instance, in the most benighted advanced country in the world, which is the United States of America, whose president has just recently declared himself to be God. The chosen one and the second coming of God. The President of the United States has gone on record now in front of the press declaring himself to be God. But if you move to the other side of the country, if you move to the West Coast, there are plenty of people who are endangering the whole population of the country, because you have rail lines, you have cars, and you have airlines that are traveling from the West Coast to all parts of the world and to all parts of the United States every day, every hour of every day. So it's not like the West Coast is somehow isolated from the rest of the country. And it's not just the West Coast, it's all throughout the Bible Belt, all throughout the Midwest. But the people in all of those enclaves who are religiously, I shouldn't say religiously, who are determined not to vaccinate their children, just to take their unvaccinated children who may contract measles or whooping cough or whatever, take their unvaccinated children and send them to public schools, where those children become disease vectors for everyone around them. If you were to ask most of those people, I bet most of those people would say they're not acting out of any religious motivation at all. The people who started that whole movement, yes, they do believe that it is a religious movement. But I'd say most of those people, especially on the West Coast, especially in California, would say that they're acting out of a scientific motivation. That there's a scientific reason for not vaccinating my children against diseases that have wiped out whole populations of humans in the course of history. That too is stagnation. That too is backwardness. But it's the same thing that Hitchens is describing in that passage, but it's not religiously motivated. And you can find that everywhere. You can find that all over the place. It's not just religion that does this, but that those two options that he points out here they do tend to be the two reactions of backward people. The central contention that he has here, which is that the rudely intentionally ignorant, be they religiously motivated or not, are never content just to be that. They think of their religion as a doctrine, and they want to spread it, that contention is absolutely true. And I guess maybe I could understand why some extrapolation of that contention would make Hitchens so strident against what he views as patient zero, as what he views as the ultimate infection that causes it. I think he's wrong about that. I think you can be ignorant in a whole bunch of ways that don't have anything to do with religion. But this chapter, that is the central drift of it. Is that this is his one and only concentrated looks at anything that is not an Abrahamic religion. He is going to, in the next chapter, chapter 15, which is titled "Religion as an Original Sin," he's going to turn his attention right back to the religions that are his main focus of ire, and we'll resume there tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, so we'll do chapter 15, and then David and I are taking the weekends off. So we will start chapter 16 on Monday. Chapter 16 is called "Is Religion Child Abuse?" But the book only has 19 chapters. So we will do Monday. We will do 16, Tuesday 17, Wednesday 18, Thursday 19, and then maybe Friday a wrap up or conclusion of some kind, and then that's it. Then we move on from there. So we will convene tomorrow. For Hitchens returning to Western religions, thank God, because this chapter was a little bit dicey, a little bit more dicey than normal. If you're going to rant at a surface level against things that you're not bothering to research, at least you should grow up in those things so that you have more information about them than is in this chapter. This chapter commits to an enormous degree the besetting sin of the whole book, which is to avoid looking at any positives in order to build a case for the negative. Better by far to turn back again to his normal focus in the next chapter. So we will reconvene tomorrow for Friday's read along and do that chapter together. And I will see you soon. Thank you, Book 2.